Folks, we just have to ask for you to come in and leave the doors closed just because we don't want smoke getting into the rest of the building.
No. I was going to get the order to let it out.
In 1813, we're an American Army and Naval Force attacked York, attacked Toronto. Hopefully, it's going to ignite the black powder and set the weapon off. So in order to actually load a musket like this, you need a cartridge. It will look like that. That is a paper cartridge. It is a paper tube with about 120 grains of black powder, and then tied at the top is a round lead musket ball. So that is one shot. So in order to load a musket like this, there were lots of different ways you could train. Different armies had different manuals to train, but the step on the pan to keep it tight. You cast about to get access to the muzzle. These are muzzle loading weapons. You pour the remaining charge of powder down the barrel. The ball goes down on top of that, and then you gotta take this thing out. What's this for? Any guesses? Push it down. It's the rammer. It's just a metal stick. You gotta use to push everything down the barrel to the bottom to the breech. Pack it in nice and tight to make sure it'll fire properly. Last very important step is make sure you put it back. And after all those steps, you have loaded one shot. So there's several steps. There's a formal way to load and train somebody to do it. It's a platoon loading exercise. But for our purposes today, we're going to fire a few shots at a much quicker rate of fire as if they're actually on the battlefield. Again, we're going to try and get this in for the range. So they're going to fire 2 shots to start. We're going to talk a little more about some stuff. So if you guys want to load and fire, load at no time. So they put starting from the shoulder. They put the musket underneath their arm to the prime position, reach around their pouches and take out a cartridge, bite off the cut tip, and then they pour a little bit of powder into the pan to form that priming charge. You see they're now casting up out, putting the remaining charge of powder. Of course, in this case, we're only firing a blank, no actual musket ball, just some powder. They ram it all down. And as you can see, depending on the amount of training you have, you might be a little quicker than some of the others, but training was very important. And after all that, they've loaded one shot. So they are going to fire, guys. You guys want to cover your ears. Now would be the time to do it.
1, 2, 3, 4. Shot! Fire!
Okay. So, as you see, they pretty much all worked. They don't always work, though. As you can imagine, these things have very nasty misfire rate. Sometimes when you pull the trigger, it doesn't always work, especially on a day like today. The flints striking steel is not for sure thing. If that black powder gets wet from moisture in the air, from the rain, if it gets really, really windy, these things don't always work. They have about 30% misfire rate. So that's one of the reasons you want to use them in large numbers, was that individually your musket was not that reliable. If you use it with large numbers, that'll sort of balance out the unreliability of it. Now you see they've reloaded again. Okay, a couple of things. If we look at the smoke, especially on a day like today, it's very obvious. That was only, half dozen guys. These weapons are all black powder. They're using black powder to shoot. They're black powder weapons. As you see, they fire and they shoot and they produce a lot of very thick gray smoke. And that's one of the reasons why armies were dressed in these weird outfits. Soldiers back then, in theory, could have been dressed exactly the same as soldiers are today, wearing various forms of camouflage and have leaves and stuff in their hats, paint their faces. You hide in the trees, you can't see them. But the problem is you fire your weapon, huge puff of smoke is produced, and everyone knows exactly where you are. So the idea was you didn't want to hide, you actually wanted to be kind of obvious who you were, where you were, because on battlefields, it wasn't 10 or 12 guys, it was hundreds, thousands of guys producing all this smoke from the muskets and from the cannons. You literally couldn't see what was going on. It created a literal fog of war, where there were a case of guys staying in battle, and I'd be between me and you guys away from each other, and they couldn't see each other, blasting away with all the smoke. So you want to be able to very easily tell who was part of which army, who was on which sides. The idea was they sort of employed the same principle of modern sports. Essentially, wear very bright uniforms, very easily distinguishable uniforms based on bright colors. So the British famously wore, bright red. The Americans wore bright blue. But then there's also these guys who are wearing green. And these guys are sort of an interesting case. These guys are dressed as the Glengarry Light Infantry, so they are a British, Canadian, essentially Canadian fencible units. They were actually raised here in Upper Canada, now Ontario, to fight and defend the province during the War of 1812. These guys fought extensively throughout the war, including here at the Battle of York, and they were meant to essentially, they're wearing green because they're trained to sort of fight as sort of skirmishers, fight in the woods, and that's where they're wearing essentially more of a camouflaging color. But then of course with those guys in green, and the problem is everyone, we're going to have to rush through this now. Fingers crossed. Okay, it worked.
evolved from the waistcoat that was worn undercoats in the 18th century, variously called a barracks jacket or a sleeved waistcoat or an undressed jacket or a fatigue jacket. It was what you wore when you didn't want to get your red coat dirty. So just a very simple shell jacket, there's no tails. You know, we'll do a spin for us. And so Stuart is dressed as if he were to go out on and be employed on the king's works, which is sort of a euphemism for doing manual labor for the army. So these walls don't build themselves. The trees that made the blockhouse don't fall down by themselves. A lot of times military labor would be used for this. And of course, you wouldn't want to be wearing your full dress uniform. I didn't talk about my cap. The stovepipe shako is the norm in the British Army. We'll see a couple of different types of headgear as well. Again, I don't want to wear this when I'm chopping down a tree, so we have a very simple forage cap. There's many different patterns of it. Stuart's British troops British adapted very quickly and effectively to cold weather, both survival and operations. So Scott's wearing a greatcoat, again, pretty similar to what a civilian man would wear, militarized in the fact that it has buttons on it that tell you what regiment he's from, cape over the shoulder, it's wool. There's some evidence they were also waterproofed, so pretty good, and he's wearing it over, there you see the full regiment marched from Fredericton to Quebec City overland in the height of winter, which was thought impossible to do. They did it with snowshoes. Soldier's wife, ready to go. Officially, every company, which was roughly 100 men, were allowed to have 6 of the men bring their wives on active service. And hair in order, and she has one of her husband's cast-off coats, which is an image that you often see when soldiers would, when artists would depict. So garrison life were drummers, and these were not just used for music. I'm sure Ross probably talked about this. This was an actual way of communication and signaling. So the drums would beat a reveille in the morning to wake everybody up. The drum beats would be known by certainly the non-commissioned officers and officers to tell them to do something. They would also play a tattoo at the end of the day, which was when the gates were closed and everybody had to be back in the fort. Uniform later. This is fashion at the time. We're in the Regency era. If you're a fan of the Jane Austen franchise, Pride and Prejudice, you know that the men's clothes are really not outlandish like they were a century before. There's not, and he is carrying everything he owns on his person, and that is no exaggeration. So the original knapsack, that's the size of it, that's pretty much his whole life in there, which is maybe another pair of pants, maybe a couple of shirts, an extra pair of shoes, personal items. Battle of York, they were quite decimated, and I think they had a casualty rate of about 65% because they were opposing the landing right when the Americans were getting ashore. And the Glengarrys are our first Canadians that we've met. They are a unit raised in Glengarry County, offensible infantry, and that was a unit that was raised for full-time service, but for a shorter duration of service and not to be put anywhere except in Canada. By 1813, many did not, so many of them showed up just like this in their civvies. They got their musket, they were issued a set of cross belts. Oftentimes they seemed to be black, the ones that they issued for the militia. Blue uniform, Kevin's an American, he's not. He's a gunner, a bombardier, sorry, in the Royal Artillery. There were 16 of these guys here at the Battle of York. Artillerymen were rare. There was really only a company in all of Upper Canada. They were dispersed everywhere, and they basically served as trainers to train up the local, usually militiamen who were trained to fire a cannon. What's this thing in his hand, you ask? It's a rammer and sponge on the other side for loading the cannon. And to show you that work in the batteries was dirty work, Kevin's also got some black on his face. And you know from experience that you get dirty really fast. Black gunpowder is filthy, disgusting, smelly stuff. So he would have been serving either at one of the main batteries right down here, where you see the flag stump and those 2 cannons, the Government House battery. The other battery was west of here, the western bombardier. They have a white pouch. Terrible choice when you're working with filthy black gunpowder, but there you go. White pouch. What else has he got? He's got a powder horn with prime. He's got some tools here for clearing the vents of the guns. So he's all set and ready to go. And if you're curious about it, this is Captain Francois Tito Lulliam of the Royal Newfoundland Fencible Infantry. And you might say, how does a guy named Francois Lulliam come into the Royal Newfoundland Fencible? Well, you have to go ask Anton afterwards. It's quite a story.
Or Tito.
That was his nickname.
Anton is what my friends call me.
Yeah. Oh, we're just going to go Tito?
Tito.
Okay, he's Tito for today.